The crystal chandelier above the Walsh family dining table sparkled like diamonds, casting light across Patricia Walsh's perfectly arranged Thanksgiving feast. I stood in the doorway of their Connecticut estate, holding the sweet potato casserole I'd spent all morning making, watching 20 family members find their seats. My husband Tom squeezed my hand briefly before his mother's voice cut through the warm chatter like ice water. "Diana, darling," Patricia said, her smile sharp as broken glass. "I'm afraid there's been a slight seating mix-up. The family table is reserved for blood relatives only this year. Such an old Walsh tradition, you understand." She gestured toward a smaller table near the kitchen door, where the hired caterers were carrying dishes. "You'll be more comfortable over there with the help and Tom's distant cousins. Much cozier, really." The room went silent. Every eye turned toward me. My face burned hot then cold. I looked at Tom, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his mother this was ridiculous. He stared at his polished shoes, his jaw tight but his mouth closed. Gerald, Tom's father, cleared his throat and studied his wine glass like it held answers. Nobody spoke up. Nobody moved. I forced my lips into a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. I walked to that side table on legs that didn't feel like my own, setting down my casserole next to a young woman I'd never met and an older man who introduced himself as someone's second cousin twice removed. The caterers gave me sympathetic looks as they rushed past with trays. Through the archway, I could see the family table where Tom now sat between his brother and sister, laughing at something Gerald said. The dinner conversation from their table drifted over. Stories about family vacations to Martha's Vineyard, inside jokes about their childhood, plans for Christmas at the estate. Patricia's voice rose above the others, bright and commanding, as she recounted some story about their ancestors founding the town's first bank. I picked at my turkey, my appetite completely gone. When dessert came, Patricia didn't even glance my way. Tom caught my eye once across the room and quickly looked away, his face red. That moment hurt worse than the seating arrangement. The realization crashed over me like a wave. He wasn't going to stand up for me. Not today. Maybe not ever. I'd been married into this family for 8 months, and I was still just the outsider. The retired schoolteacher who wasn't good enough for their precious son. The car ride home stretched in painful silence. I stared out the window at the dark Connecticut roads, watching trees blur past under streetlights. My wedding ring caught the light each time we passed under a lamp, the gold band suddenly feeling heavy on my finger. Tom drove with both hands gripped tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Are we going to talk about what happened?" I finally asked, my voice quiet but steady. Tom sighed heavily. "You know how my mother gets, Diana. She's very traditional about family gatherings. It's not personal. Not personal." I turned to look at him. "She seated me with the hired help, Tom. In front of your entire family. And you said nothing. What did you want me to do? Start a fight at Thanksgiving dinner?" His voice rose slightly. "My parents are set in their ways. Making a scene wouldn't have helped anything. I didn't want you to make a scene. I wanted you to stand beside me." The words came out softer than I intended, almost broken. "I'm your wife." Tom's jaw clenched. "Can we not do this tonight? I'm tired." He turned up the radio volume slightly, ending the conversation. I turned back to the window, watching my reflection in the glass, and felt something inside me go very quiet and very cold. The following weeks felt different in our house. Small things I'd overlooked before suddenly stood out sharp and clear. Tom always answered his mother's calls immediately, even during our dinners together. When I suggested we skip the upcoming family Christmas gathering, he acted like I'd asked him to betray his country. "You're being dramatic," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "They're just old-fashioned. You need thicker skin." I stopped arguing. Instead I watched. I noticed how he quoted his father's opinions about politics, business, and life as if they were gospel. How he still called Patricia every Sunday morning, their conversation lasting over an hour while I read the newspaper alone. How he'd started making comments about my simple teaching background when his parents visited, as if apologizing for who I was. One evening, I attended a neighborhood charity luncheon at the country club. The food was mediocre, but the conversation proved interesting. Two women at my table gossiped in hushed voices about local families facing money troubles. When the name Walsh came up, my ears perked up immediately. "Gerald made some terrible investments last year," one woman whispered behind her napkin. "Real estate deals that went completely south. I heard they refinanced parts of the estate just to cover the losses." My mind filed this information away carefully, saying nothing. Curiosity turned into something more deliberate. I spent my mornings at the public library, looking through business filings and property records that anyone could access. Connecticut keeps excellent public documents. What I found fascinated me. The Walsh family company, once successful in manufacturing, had been bleeding money for 3 years. Gerald had borrowed against the estate multiple times. The property taxes were months behind. The irony struck me hard. Patricia Walsh, who looked down her nose at my middle-class background, was drowning in debt while wearing designer clothes and hosting elaborate dinners. They were living on credit and reputation, the house of cards getting shakier every month. Yet they still had the nerve to treat me like I wasn't worthy of their table. Printed nothing. I took careful notes in a small journal I kept locked in my desk drawer. Every loan amount, every missed payment, every business deal gone wrong. Knowledge I'd learned during my years teaching business management before retiring was the foundation of power. And patience was how you built something that lasted. Tom noticed me spending more time at the library. "Research for a volunteer project," I told him with a pleasant smile. He nodded without real interest and went back to his laptop, probably emailing his father about something. The next family dinner came too soon. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing fancy, and helped Tom carry wine bottles into the estate's grand foyer. Patricia greeted us at the door, her eyes scanning my outfit with barely concealed disappointment. "Oh, Diana, how practical of you." Over drinks in the sitting room, Patricia complained loudly about how boring retirement must be for me. "I simply can't imagine having nothing to do all day. Don't you miss having purpose?" The comment stung, designed to wound. But I kept my face calm and saw my opportunity. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. I taught business management for 25 years. I'd love to help with something meaningful. Doesn't your family organize that annual charity gala every spring?" Patricia's eyebrows rose. "The Walsh Foundation Gala. That's been our family's signature event for 40 years. "I know. It's wonderful. I'd be honored to help organize it if you'd let me. Just support work, of course." I smiled warmly, genuinely. Patricia exchanged glances with Gerald. I could see the wheels turning. The gala had been poorly managed last year, ending with mediocre attendance and embarrassing press coverage. But accepting help from me meant admitting I had skills they needed. Gerald spoke first. "That's quite generous, Diana." Patricia's smile turned tight. "Well, I suppose we could let you help with some of the smaller details. It would be good practice for you." I threw myself into the gala planning with focused energy. Patricia had given me access to the foundation's records, probably expecting me to handle basic phone calls and venue logistics. Instead, I studied everything. The previous 3 years showed declining attendance, rising costs, and increasingly generic programming. The foundation was wasting money on expensive champagne and elaborate ice sculptures while offering donors nothing memorable. I contacted the local business community through connections from my teaching days. 3 former students now ran successful companies and jumped at the chance to sponsor meaningful programming. I replaced the tired auction format with an elegant donor cultivation dinner, where people actually talked about the cause instead of competing over golf packages. I found a talented local caterer who cost half what Patricia's fancy Boston vendor charged. When the gala night arrived, everything ran perfectly. The intimate venue felt warm instead of stuffy. Donors mingled genuinely instead of performing wealth. The local newspaper sent a reporter who wrote a glowing review praising the gala's elegant simplicity and renewed focus on community impact. My name appeared 3 times in the article. Patricia's appeared once, in passing. At breakfast the next morning, Patricia called Tom in a rage. I could hear her shrill voice through the phone. Diana made me look incompetent. Everyone thinks she saved the gala from my mismanagement. Tom looked at me nervously. I simply smiled and sipped my coffee. Gerald cornered me at their house the following Sunday. Tom had gone upstairs to help his father find some old tax documents, leaving us alone in the study. Gerald closed the door quietly, his face serious. Diana, we need to talk about the gala. His voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. Patricia feels you deliberately made her look foolish in front of the foundation board. I set down my tea carefully. I didn't need to make anyone look foolish, Gerald. I just organized an event. If that reflected poorly on previous years, perhaps that says more about those events than about me. His face reddened. You're being disrespectful. No, I'm being honest, which seems to be something this family struggles with. Gerald opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked shaken, like no one had spoken to him this directly in years. I stood, smoothing my skirt, and walked past him out of the study. My hands trembled slightly as I climbed the stairs, but my voice had stayed perfectly steady. Tom noticed the tension when we left. What happened with Dad? Nothing important, I replied. Just a conversation about honesty. Tom didn't push further, but I saw him glance at me sideways during the drive home, like he was seeing something new he didn't quite recognize. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later through pure accident. I'd been copied on an email chain about gala follow-up thank you letters. A financial consultant hired by the foundation accidentally hit reply all, instead of sending his message only to Gerald. The attached file opened before I could look away. It was worse than I'd thought. The Walsh estate owed over $400,000 in back property taxes. Additional loans against the property totaled nearly $2 million. Gerald's recent business ventures had lost money consistently. The foundation itself was solvent, but the family's personal finances were a disaster waiting to collapse. I stared at my computer screen for a long moment. Then I did something that felt both wrong and completely necessary. I printed the entire document. 3 copies. One went into my locked desk drawer. One went into a safety deposit box I'd opened that week at a bank across town. The third I studied carefully, highlighting every loan date, every missed payment, every desperate refinancing attempt. Knowledge was power, but applied knowledge was transformation. I was beginning to see the entire chessboard now, and I didn't like where Tom and I were positioned as pawns. They invited us to dinner again 2 weeks later. I should have known something was wrong when Patricia's voice on the phone sounded too sweet, too welcoming. Just a casual family meal, Diana. Nothing fancy. Do come. I wore a simple dress and brought flowers from our garden. When we arrived, the table was set for 12 people. But when Patricia began serving the meal, she handed plates to everyone except me. One by one, every family member received their dinner. Tom got his. Gerald got his. The cousins got theirs. Patricia sat down last, and only then seemed to notice my empty space. Oh! She pressed her hand to her chest. Diana, I'm so sorry. I must have miscounted. How silly of me. She didn't move to fix it. Nobody else moved either. Tom shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. I stood up slowly, carefully, and picked up my purse. Thank you for the invitation, Patricia. I'll eat at home. My voice came out calmer than I felt. I drove home alone. Tom stayed, of course. He came back 3 hours later, smelling like his father's expensive whiskey, and found me in the kitchen with a glass of wine and a plate of pasta I'd made myself. She didn't mean anything by it, he started. I held up one hand. Please don't. I finished my wine in silence and went upstairs to the guest bedroom, closing the door quietly behind me. Our anniversary fell on a Tuesday in April. I woke up expecting flowers, breakfast in bed, or at least a card. Instead, I found a note on the kitchen counter written in Tom's rushed handwriting. Dad needs help with foundation paperwork. Be back tonight. Sorry. That was it. 15 years of marriage to my first husband before he died, 2 years of dating Tom, 8 months of marriage to him, and our first anniversary rated an apology note and an empty house. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, turning my wedding ring around and around on my finger. Then I called my lawyer. Not for divorce advice. Not yet. But for financial protection. I want to understand my options, I told her. I want to move my assets into my personal trust, completely legally. Can we do that? Absolutely, she confirmed. You have every right to protect your inheritance and retirement savings. By the end of the week, I'd moved my late husband's life insurance payout, my pension, and my small investment accounts into an irrevocable trust with only my name on it. Tom never even noticed the paperwork I'd signed. He was too busy helping Gerald restructure loans they couldn't afford to repay. When Tom finally came home that anniversary night at almost midnight, I was already asleep, or pretending to be. The argument happened on a Saturday morning 3 weeks later. Tom had spent Friday night at his parents' house again, coming home after I'd gone to bed. I was drinking coffee on the porch when he finally stumbled downstairs, looking rumpled and tired. We need to talk about how much time you spend there, I said quietly. Tom poured himself coffee with shaking hands. They need my help right now. Dad's business is struggling. I know it is. I also know you forget we exist when your parents call. That's not fair. His voice rose. They're my family. Something in me snapped. And what am I, Tom? That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. I stood up, looking at him directly. Your parents have always thought I married up. That I should be grateful you chose someone like me. And you believe it too. Tom's face went red. You're twisting everything. My parents just have high standards. They built something from nothing. They expect excellence. I laughed, bitter and sharp. They built something from nothing. Tom, your parents are drowning in debt. Their excellence is all show and borrowed money. How dare you? He stepped toward me, angry now. I dare because I'm tired of shrinking to fit your family's delusional pride. My voice stayed level, cold. You really think you're the prize in this marriage, don't you? Tom stared at me like I'd slapped him. Then he grabbed his car keys and walked out. I watched him drive away and didn't move to stop him. The phone call came from an unexpected source 2 days later. Richard Morrison, a senior banker at Connecticut Community Trust, had attended the charity gala. He'd been impressed with my organizational skills and business sense. Mrs. Walsh, I'm calling to see if you'd consider consulting for our bank's community outreach programs. It's part-time work, but meaningful. We could use your expertise. I accepted before he finished explaining the details. The position was small, maybe 10 hours a week, but it came with something more valuable than money. Came with credibility, with connections, with access to financial information and community influence. Tom barely reacted when I told him. That's nice, he said absently, focused on his laptop. He didn't ask about my responsibilities or congratulate me. He'd stopped seeing me months ago if he ever really had. I started at the bank the following Monday. Richard introduced me to the executive team, and I began reviewing their charitable giving programs. The work felt good, meaningful. More importantly, people treated me with respect. They listened when I spoke. They valued my opinions. And I was working at the very bank that held most of the Walsh family's defaulting loans. Patricia showed up at the bank on a Thursday afternoon, looking flustered and desperate. I was in Richard's office reviewing a community grant proposal when his assistant announced Mrs. Patricia Walsh had arrived, demanding to see someone immediately about her account. Richard glanced at me. That's your mother-in-law, isn't it? Unfortunately, yes. Would you like me to handle this privately? I thought for a moment, then shook my head. No. I'll come. We found Patricia in the lobby, pacing like a caged animal. Her perfect composure had cracked. Her hair was slightly messy, her lipstick uneven. When she saw me, her eyes went wide with surprise, then narrowed with calculation. "Diana, what are you doing here?" "I work here. Community Outreach Consulting." I kept my voice professional and cool. "Is there something I can help you with?" Patricia's face flushed. "This is a private matter. I need to speak with someone in management about our estate loan. The bank is threatening foreclosure. It's completely unreasonable." Richard stepped forward smoothly. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm Richard Morrison, Senior Vice President. Perhaps we should speak in my office." Patricia shot me a desperate look, probably hoping I'd leave. Instead, I followed them into Richard's office. She couldn't object without making a scene. I sat quietly in the corner while Richard pulled up her account on his computer. The numbers were worse than I'd seen in that forwarded email. Much worse. Richard explained the situation to Patricia with professional courtesy. The bank had extended payment deadlines twice already. They'd restructured the loan terms to help the family. But months of missed payments had reached a critical point. Without significant payment within 30 days, foreclosure procedures would begin. Patricia's hands shook as she held her designer handbag. "There must be something we can do. Gerald is working on new business deals. We just need a little more time. Mrs. Walsh, the bank has been very patient. But we have responsibilities to our shareholders and other clients." Richard's voice was kind but firm. Patricia stood abruptly. "This is humiliating. Our family founded this town. We deserve better treatment." After she left, Richard turned to me. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "Don't be." I stared at the closed door. "Actually, Richard, I have a question. If someone wanted to purchase a defaulting loan note from the bank, would that be possible? Legally?" He raised his eyebrows. "Technically, yes. We occasionally sell distressed assets to private investors." "Why do you ask?" "Curiosity," I said. But my mind was already calculating possibilities. I had money from my first husband's life insurance. My pension was stable. I'd spent 25 years living modestly, saving carefully. What would a loan of that size cost to purchase? Richard looked at me thoughtfully for a long moment. Then he closed his office door. The paperwork took 3 weeks to finalize. Richard connected me with the bank's legal team, who explained everything carefully. By purchasing the distressed loan note, I would essentially become the lender. The Walsh family would owe me, not the bank. Everything was legal, transparent, and properly documented. My lawyer reviewed every page. "Diana, are you certain about this? This will permanently change your relationship with your husband's family." "That relationship was never real," I replied. "They made that clear the day they sat me with the hired help." The closing happened on a Thursday morning. I signed the papers in Richard's office, transferring funds from my trust account. Just like that, I owned the debt secured by the Walsh family estate. The house where I'd been humiliated now existed because I allowed it to. I didn't tell Tom immediately. I waited. I watched. That weekend, we were invited to the estate for Sunday dinner. I went, wearing a simple dress, carrying wine like always. Patricia was cold but civil. Gerald barely spoke to me. Tom laughed at his father's jokes and helped his mother clear dishes like a dutiful son. After dessert, when everyone had moved to the sitting room, I said quietly, "Tom, there's something we need to discuss. About your parents' house." His face went pale. "What about it? We should talk privately." I stood up. "Perhaps your father's study." Tom, Gerald, and Patricia followed me into the study, their faces showing growing alarm. I placed my briefcase on Gerald's massive desk and pulled out the loan documents, laying them out one by one. "As of last Thursday," I said calmly, "I purchased your defaulting estate loan from Connecticut Community Trust. I am now the legal holder of the debt secured by this property." The silence that fell was absolute. Patricia's face went white, then red. Gerald sank into his desk chair like his legs had given out. Tom stared at the papers, his mouth opening and closing without sound. You what?" Patricia's voice came out as a whisper. I bought the loan. Everything is legal and properly documented. Richard Morrison at the bank can confirm the details. I kept my voice steady and professional. You now owe me approximately $2 million, secured by this estate. You can't do this. Patricia's voice rose to a shriek. This is our family's home. You're betraying us. I looked at her directly. Patricia, you can't betray people who never accepted you. You made it very clear I wasn't family. Well, now I'm not family. I'm your creditor. Tom found his voice finally, shaking and angry. Diana, this is insane. You're my wife. Yes, him. And you didn't want me at your family's table. I began collecting the papers. You have the same payment terms the bank offered. I'm not being cruel. I'm being businesslike, which is what you all taught me to be. Tom followed me home, driving too fast. His face twisted with anger and confusion. He stormed into our house and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. What the hell were you thinking? You just bought my parents' house out from under them. No, I bought their debt. There's a difference. I set my keys down carefully on the hall table. They can keep the house if they make payments. Payments they can't afford. You know that. He paced the living room like a trapped animal. How could you do this to my family? Your family. I repeated the words slowly. Tom, when did you start considering me part of your family? Was it when your mother seated me with the caterers? When she forgot to serve me dinner? When you stayed silent every single time they humiliated me? That's different. No, it's not. Cut him off. I spent 8 months trying to earn a place in your family. I was polite. I was patient. I brought gifts and helped with events and smiled while your mother called me plain and boring and unsuitable. And you never once defended me. Tom's anger collapsed into something like panic. Diana, please. Be reasonable. We can work this out. I am being reasonable. I've been nothing but reasonable for months. I walked to the stairs, then turned back. I'm done shrinking myself to fit into your family's idea of acceptable. I'm done pretending their cruelty is tradition. You can stay here tonight if you want, or you can go back to the estate. But I need space to think. I went upstairs and closed the bedroom door, my hands finally shaking. 3 months passed. Tom moved out, staying in the guest house at his parents' estate while they figured out their finances. I filed for legal separation, not divorce, giving him time to decide what he really wanted. My lawyer was excellent. The separation agreement protected my assets completely. The Walsh family tried to make payments. They managed 1, then 2, then started missing them again. Gerald's business deals never materialized. Patricia tried selling jewelry and furniture, but it barely made a dent. The deadline approached like a storm they couldn't outrun. I spent those months building my new life. The bank consulting work expanded. Richard recommended me to other organizations. I joined boards, attended conferences, made genuine friends. People who saw me as Diana Walsh the professional, not Diana Walsh the unsuitable wife. When winter came, I decided to host a charity dinner at the estate. It was within my rights as the loan holder. The house could be used for foundation events. I sent formal invitations to everyone important in Connecticut society. I hired the best caterers, brought in elegant decorations, planned meaningful programming. Patricia called me 12 times before the event. I didn't answer. She sent Tom to beg me to cancel. Politely declined. The dinner would proceed as planned. The night of the charity dinner, the Walsh estate looked magnificent. Fresh flowers filled every room. Candles glowed on every surface. String lights sparkled in the winter garden. Guests arrived in elegant clothing, their cars filling the circular driveway that I'd had freshly paved. I stood in the foyer greeting people, wearing a deep green dress that cost more than I'd normally spend but felt worth every penny. Town leaders shook my hand. Business owners thanked me for organizing such a wonderful event. Former students who'd become successful professionals hugged me warmly. When Patricia and Gerald arrived, Looking older and smaller than I remembered, the room fell briefly silent. People knew about the loan situation. Small towns have no secrets. Patricia wore her best dress, but it hung loose on her thinner frame. Gerald's suit looked tired. They stood uncertainly in the doorway until I walked over. Patricia. Gerald. Thank you for coming. My voice was gracious, hostess perfect. This is our home, Patricia whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Yes, I agreed. It's a beautiful home. That's why I wanted to share it with people who would appreciate it. I gestured to the grand dining room where tables were set. Dinner will be served shortly. Please find your seats. Patricia's eyes swept the room, landing on the head table where a single reserved seat sat with a small card. Her name wasn't on it. When dinner began, I made my way to the head table, the reserved seat. Patricia watched from a side table, her face pale, as I sat down in the position of honor she'd always claimed as hers. The irony was perfect. 8 months ago, she'd exiled me to a side table. Tonight she sat where I once had while I took her place. The meal was excellent. The conversation was warm. I gave a short speech about community, kindness, and the importance of creating spaces where everyone felt valued. People applauded. Several donors increased their commitments to the foundation. The local newspaper took photographs of me at the head table, smiling and confident. After dinner, as guests mingled in the sitting rooms, Patricia cornered me in the hallway outside the study. Her face was a mixture of rage and desperation. How could you do this to us? We're family. I looked at her steadily. You had many chances to treat me like family, Patricia. You chose differently every single time. But you've ruined us. Her voice cracked. We're losing everything because of you. No. I kept my voice gentle but firm. You're losing everything because Gerald made terrible business decisions. Because you spent money you didn't have to maintain appearances. Because you valued status over substance. Pause. I didn't do anything to you, Patricia. I just stopped letting you do things to me. She stared at me, tears starting to stream down her face. Then she turned and walked away, Gerald following behind her like a shadow. The divorce papers arrived in spring, delivered to Tom at the estate where he'd been living full-time. I'd finally filed after our separation period ended. He came to the house one last time, looking tired and defeated. Diana, he said, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed inside. Can we talk? We sat in the living room, tea cooling between us on the coffee table. Tom looked older than his 42 years. His face lined with stress and regret. I should have defended you, he said quietly. At Thanksgiving. At every family dinner. I should have stood up to my mother years ago. I see that now. Yes, you should have. I didn't soften my words. He deserved truth, not comfort. Do you think we could try again? If I changed, Tom. I stopped him gently. I don't love the version of you that exists with your family. And I don't think that version can change. You'll always choose them. He was quiet for a long moment. Do you still love me at all? I thought about that carefully. I loved who I thought you were. But that person didn't really exist. I'm sorry. The divorce was finalized within weeks. I gave Tom a fair settlement, nothing vindictive, just clean boundaries. He moved to Boston, taking a job far from his parents' orbit. Maybe distance would help him figure out who he was without them. With the divorce final and the estate loan payment still in default, I made my decision. I foreclosed on the property, following every legal requirement. The Walsh family had to move out. Gerald and Patricia found a small condo in a less fashionable part of town. Their fall from grace was complete. But I didn't keep the estate for myself. Instead, I transferred it to a new foundation I'd created, the Diana Morrison Walsh Foundation for Women's Independence. The estate became a retreat center and educational facility for women rebuilding their lives after late-life divorce or widowhood. We offered financial literacy classes, professional development programs, support groups, scholarship opportunities. The foundation partnered with local colleges, businesses, and community organizations. Every woman who came through our doors was treated with dignity and respect. The local press celebrated the transformation. National women's magazines wrote features. The foundation received grants and donations from across the country. For once, the Walsh name became associated with something genuinely meaningful rather than empty social status. Patricia read about it in the newspaper. She called me once, her voice small. "You turned our home into a charity." "No," I corrected her. "I turned your house into something that actually helps people. There's a difference." 2 years later, the foundation held its annual gala at the estate. The event had become the highlight of Connecticut's social calendar, not for its exclusivity, but for its impact. We'd helped over 300 women restart their lives. We'd distributed over $2 million in scholarships. We'd created real change. I stood on the stage accepting a Community Leadership Award, looking out at the crowd of supporters, when I saw Patricia in the back row. She was older now, frielier, her designer clothes replaced with simpler outfits. Gerald had passed away 6 months earlier, his heart giving out from stress and shame. After my speech, Patricia approached slowly. "Diana, I wonder if I could speak with you." We walked to the garden, bare trees casting shadows in the winter afternoon light. Patricia's hands trembled as she pulled her coat tighter. "I was wrong about you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I spent so many years thinking breeding and money made people valuable. But you showed more grace in your worst moments than I ever showed in my best." I looked at her, this woman who'd caused me so much pain, now diminished and humbled. I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, just a quiet sadness for wasted years. "Patricia, you weren't wrong about me. You were wrong about what matters. Money doesn't make people worthy. Kindness does. Respect does. Love does." Pause. "You were also wrong about yourself." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her wrinkled cheeks. "Can you ever forgive me?" I thought about that question. I can't forget what happened, but I've stopped letting it hurt me. Maybe that's enough. Tonight, 3 years after that first humiliating Thanksgiving, I'm hosting a dinner at the estate. Not a formal gala or a charity event. Just a small gathering of friends. Real friends who chose to know me and love me as I am. The dining room glows with warm light. My table is set for 8. There's my former student Marcus, now a successful architect, and his husband. There's Rachel from the bank and her teenage daughter. There's my neighbor Janet who brings me tomatoes from her garden. There's Sarah, a foundation graduate who just opened her own accounting firm. I sit at the head of the table, the position once denied to me, now mine by right and choice. We share food and laughter and stories. Nobody here judges anyone by their bank account or pedigree. We're just people who treat each other with basic human kindness. As dessert arrives, I raise my glass. "To family," I say, looking around at these faces I've chosen and who've chosen me. Not the family we're born into or marry into, but the family we create through choice and kindness and respect. "To family," they echo, glasses chiming together. Through the window, I can see snow beginning to fall, soft and peaceful. The estate that once represented everything I wasn't good enough for now represents everything I've become. Not through revenge or cruelty, but through refusing to accept less than I deserved. Victory doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like dignity, a grace. Like a woman sitting at her own table, surrounded by people who actually see her worth, finally at peace with exactly who she is. I smile, take a sip of wine, and let the conversation wash over me like a warm tide. This is what winning really feels like. Not bitter, not vindictive, just quietly, profoundly satisfied. The snow falls harder outside, covering the grounds in white, making everything clean and new, just like my life.